Well, good evening. My name is Jeff Casello. I'm an associate professor of transportation at the University of Waterloo. I do combine planning and engineering. For the last 10 years, I've been teaching courses in both disciplines and increasingly teaching courses that involve students from both disciplines and engaging them in collaborative work. We haven't had any fist fights yet between the engineers and the planners, although maybe they're happening, I just don't know about it. I feel a little bit awkward. We had a fantastic first presentation, and now I'm sort of the intermission before the real rock star comes on, so I will try to be on time and on point. What I'd like to talk to you about is what we're doing in the region of Waterloo. And so this is the outline for tonight. What really motivated the region of Waterloo to begin to think about rapid transit, and where have we come? What are the project components? So what are we trying to do? And as Michael had told us, our project is really very much about two things. It's about moving people, but it's also about changing the way in which Waterloo develops. It's very much a land use project, and you'll see that in some of the slides that I'll be presenting tonight. What have we already seen changing? I mean, we've been talking about rapid transit in the region of Waterloo for, well, it's been on our official plan for more than 40 years. But we really started in earnest more than a decade ago, and we're already seeing changes in our landforms in Waterloo. And I think that I'll be able to show you some of the changes that are already happening. The development community is already responding to what's going to be built and operated in the next 3 years. I want to talk to you also about the challenges that we faced, and there are many. One of the real challenges about a transit project is getting the public motivated. It's very exciting for me to see so many of you here tonight, and there's nothing I like to talk about more than public transport, so this is really great. But there are some challenges that you will face, I think, as you roll out this project, and engaging the public meaningfully will be one of those challenges. So I'll try to tell you what we did in the region of Waterloo, what worked well, and what didn't work well. First motivating factor is shown here in this graph. So this is 1960, and the darker the red, the more concentrated the development. And you see Waterloo is in the top left of your screen, Kitchener in the center, and then Cambridge wasn't Cambridge at the time, it was 3 municipalities. If you speak to some of the older folks from Cambridge, they'll still tell you they're from Galt or Preston or Hesper. They're not from Cambridge. There's still some residual unhappiness about the amalgamation. But this is what the city looked like, or the cities looked like in 1960. If I move ahead by 20 years, what you see is a pretty traditional North American growth pattern where you see much outward growth. And that happened from 1960 to 1980, and then again from 1980 to 2000. And the region now has collected data that shows that this is continuing to happen. We have outward growth, and that has been increasingly realized as being unsustainable. It's not how communities want to grow anymore, and there's lots of reasons why that is, and I'll talk about some of them. So really, our motivation was, first in 2003, we developed a regional growth management strategy, and the real question we tried to answer was the first one: how can we make living, working, and entertainment more attractive in already built up corridors? How can we reduce the outward growth and the negative environmental impacts? And how can we provide viable transportation alternatives in this corridor so that all of the things, all the answers to the first question can be realized? Now the picture you see on the left is the region of Waterloo. The orange in the center is the central transit corridor where we are building. The hard boundaries that you see are what we call the countryside line, or the environmentally sensitive line. We are not allowed to build in those areas because we have water sources underneath those areas, outside of the built-up area. And that's where we get our drinking water from. So we are protecting our groundwater by not moving out any further. And one thing we had to do is we had to make sure there was sufficient land and development to continue, because if you stall development by not making land development, that's against the economic development rules. But what we did was we said, yes, we've got enough land for the next 30 years, and so we can bound development to only happen inside of the built-up area. Just for context, the region is about 550,000. We're planning on being 730,000 by 2031. Most of that growth is from immigration, not from natural growth, because what's happening is a number of immigrants are being priced out of the Toronto market and finding a home in the region of Waterloo. So what happened at the same time? Well, provincial policy came into place. The provincial policy statement said that the region of Waterloo was a place to grow. The only way you could get infrastructure money was if you increased your densities in your built-up areas, and so we responded to that. That also was reinforced in 2006 by the Greater Golden Horseshoe Plan. So this is the area containing the GTA, Hamilton, and extending all the way out to the region of Waterloo. Our growth management strategy turned into our regional official plan that is actually still being debated at the Ontario Municipal Board, but much of the principles of intensification, inward-looking growth, building upward, not outward, are contained in the regional regional official plan. One other thing that didn't get a lot of talk, but there was also some legislation around brownfields. So brownfields are areas that used to be industrial sites. They're often contaminated. Developers don't want to often develop there because there is a lot of risk associated with unearthing old manufacturing sites. Well, the province has taken a lot of that risk away for developers, and that policy is really important when you're talking about revitalizing downtown areas. So here's our project. Again, you see that the Waterloo is in the top left corner of your screen. Kitchener is in the very center of the screen, and Cambridge on the bottom right. Our initial project is 19 kilometers of light rail transit. It has 22 stations. We're complementing that with 16 kilometers of what we're calling adapted bus rapid transit. So it is longer station spacing, some higher speed technologies, better information for passengers, and so on. The funding sources, it's $818 million to build our project, 32% from the feds, 37% from the province of Ontario, 31% of that is local. The way we're advancing the project is what we call a P3, a public-private partnership. The private partners for this project are being asked to design the project, build the project, finance the project, and then they will be responsible for operating and maintaining that project for an additional 30 years. The motivation for doing this is it shifts some of the risk from the public sector, from government, to the private sector. And so if you're funding a project or you're building a project that you're going to have to operate for the next 30 years, you have an inherent motivation to build that project to a higher standard if you're going to be responsible for operating it for all that time. So we're under construction, as we've heard, and we should have operations by 2017. How's it being done? Well, we have the Grand Link Consortium. These are the firms that are involved. You can see the partnership. One group is managing the partnership, another group in charge of the finances, some in charge of planning. Kiewit is our contractor. Keolis is a major operator. They operate the pub. This trend to having private sector people operate public sector services and waste management and transportation, this is happening globally, and Keolis is one of these companies that are doing that. Bombardier is making our vehicles, and the vehicle is, this is our flexi vehicle that will be used. The picture on the bottom right is actually an adapted bus rapid transit, and so this is what we call a Q-jump lane. So our buses will come, and rather than staying in the rightmost lane and staying behind cars, they're able to go into a bus-only lane in intersections and become the first vehicle in the queue. And so after boarding and alighting, they're the first ones out of that queue. So that significantly speeds up the quality of bus service. And that's the part of the system that we'll be using in some cases on the southern part of our alignment. Here's the timeline. I won't go into all of this. The only thing that I want to draw your attention to is that, again, we began in May of 2004 was when this regional growth management strategy came, and we got first approval for the project in 2009. We had some municipal elections in 2010 that re-stirred the pot a little bit. In 2011, there was another series of public consultations, and finally approval then again in 2011. But now it's 2015 and we're just underway. So this is a project that doesn't happen quickly or can be difficult to happen quickly. So you really have to have both feet on the ground and have direction when you begin this process, or at least that's what we've learned in the region of Waterloo. It's a really important point. Any rapid transit alignment by itself is not going to be successful. What you need to have a rapid transit system or a rapid transit network. And so, again, the center line here is the alignment for the light rail transit. We ran an express bus service on that alignment for 10 years before we upgraded to rail. And so this is our iExpress network. We began with the first one in the same corridor where the rail system is going to be built. But over time, we realized that we need to feed that rail system, and we need to feed the existing bus system. And this is why you see all of these crosstown routes. And so we started out with one iExpress route. Now we have 5 in operation, with 4 more scheduled to be built at the same time that the rapid transit system is being built. So what have we seen? Well, the development community has responded. What I'm going to do is just take you through a couple of stations along the way and show you the kinds of development that have happened in the last 5 or 6 years since we agreed on rapid transit. And so the first is here, and this is right in downtown Kitchener. The building on the right-hand side of the slide is an old tannery, and it had been vacant for some time, and in the last 5 years, we've had some companies that you may have heard of moved in there. There's a small company called Google that is now residing in that factory building. There's also an innovation hub, so that my own university and other universities are allowing students to go there to build new products, to develop new applications, to try and make this as an incubator or an economic development hub. Just a little bit up the line is the Bauer Lofts. This was again a factory. This factory closed in the late 90s. They used to make auto manufacturing upholstery. So they made the car seats, the interiors of cars, and in 1999 that building closed. So in the picture it is not the tall, the center picture is not the tall building, it's the smaller building that looks a bit like a factory. That was converted to a retail establishment. There's a restaurant, there's a series of coffee shops, there's an art gallery, some other development in that area. And right next to it is a 14-story condo tower that was built. And there will be a rapid transit station immediately out the front door of that new high-rise condominium. And that's certainly part of the attraction for developers and for residents. That building was sold out before it was beginning construction. There's another 14-story tower directly behind that building that sold out before construction, and so that tower became a twin tower, and so there's two 14-tower buildings on top of 4-story walk-up condominiums right behind this building that you see. And again, my impression and the impression of others is that this kind of development was stimulated by the talk of the rapid transit system. The last one is right in the core of Uptown Waterloo. Seagram's was founded in Uptown Waterloo, so there was the barrel yard. There's a small river that used to be the power for Seagram's factory. There was the Cooper House, so where they kept all the barrels to cure the whiskey. That had been on that site for some years. It then became vacant, and this is what's being built now. A luxury hotel, hundreds of thousands of square feet of commercial space, a number of residences, again, with light rail transit stops immediately outside the front door of these locations. Our project is predominantly a land use project. Yes, it has a transportation component, but the idea for our project was to make living, working, commuting into the downtown core very easy and very functional, very convenient, and make it feasible for people who wanted to live with fewer cars, with their ability for their children and for themselves to walk to work or school. That's what our project is predominantly about, changing the way that we travel and the way that we live and work in the region of Waterloo. And this is what we're seeing in terms of the land use changes. We also have had this over the last, this graph shows the last 20 years. On this graph, the red line shows the growth in population in the region of Waterloo. The blue line shows how many hours of service we've been offering as a transit company. And the green line shows our changes in ridership. Not all of that ridership is because of students. We've got some evidence that for every new student rider, there is a new non-student rider in the region of Waterloo as well. So what happens is when you start to get to this level of ridership, and this is about 48 or so rides per capita, what you're looking at here, when you start to get to this level of ridership with some of it concentrated on the core, you need to upgrade your technology away from bus towards a rail system. You get higher returns. And I can show you here, basically this is what happens. I don't expect you to follow all this, except that as you move, demand goes across the bottom. The cost of operating buses is in green. The cost of operating rail is in red. And there is a crossover point where you get this enough demand in one corridor where it makes sense to think about rail. So as a starting point for your analysis, it's important that you have a sense of what your demand might be so that you can begin to determine where you are on this kind of continuum. Just go quickly. What are the other benefits that you should be thinking about rapid transit? Well, the first thing is that from an infrastructure perspective, we're really struggling in Canada to maintain our water infrastructure, our sewer infrastructure, our hydro infrastructure. And every time we build a new subdivision on the outskirts of town, we have to extend all of our infrastructure to serve those areas. And we increase the quantity of infrastructure we have, and our deficit, our ability to fund and maintain that infrastructure, gets deeper and deeper. We get ourselves in more trouble. So if we can bring ourselves to where we have higher density of residents, of commercial use, then we have less infrastructure and lower municipal costs. And And that has a direct benefit to everybody in the community in lower property taxes, because you now have less infrastructure to maintain. The other not so benefits is we have lower energy consumption, improved air quality, and I think Michael's point is spot on, that when you have a very good transit system, you have a very good, typically walking system and cycling system as well. And all of these modes are less expensive, they're more equitable, anybody can walk, you don't need to buy a car, you don't need to pay for that. So there's tremendous benefits associated with building this light rail transit system. What kind of challenges can you expect? Well, there'll be a lot of the population in London that don't believe in rapid transit. They don't use it, they have no intention to use it. And so when we began to look at our rapid transit system, there were no shortages of letters to the editor. So we picked out 250 interesting ones, and we classified them into these categories. The blue lines that you see are people calling for a referendum on rapid transit. I will say respectfully that there are many people who travel that believe that because they travel, they are experts in rapid transit planning, design, ridership forecasts, those kinds of things. I have a colleague who says that building transit systems isn't rocket science. In fact, it's much harder, because predicting how human beings are going to behave is much more difficult than predicting how rocket fuel is going to behave. Okay? The orange lines, the red lines that you see here are people who are worried about cost and property tax implications. And the green lines are looking at people who are advocating for one technology over another. And there are many who have very strong biases towards technology. I also try to be technology agnostic. Okay, so one of the things, you're going to have people with polarized opinions. You're going to have people who hate the idea, you're going to have people who love the idea, and what's going to happen in our experience is those are the people who are going to show up to most of the public consultations. They're very strong opinions. And so to be successful in engaging the public, the thing you're going to have to do is make this meaningful to as many people as you can. And the way that we found out to make that meaningful is to talk about things like suburban benefits. So let me explain. If you have people moving into the downtown core, what it does is it protects the suburbs so they continue to function like suburbs. And that's an important message. It's a way to engage the people who have never ridden transit and have no expectation to ride transit to understand how they're going to directly benefit. Talk about property taxes right away. It's an important and incredibly, I will say, volatile issue. If you leave this to the end like we did, that's a mistake. I think that the things around environment and equity and land use changes, they're a little bit hard to explain, so you have to do a really good and meaningful job to do that. But the right way to get people from across all economic sectors, all races, creeds, colors, all interest levels, is to make it relevant to them. Talk about why it's important to them. Talk about why it's complementary to walking and cycling, why it will influence your property tax, how it will protect nature, how it will protect suburban areas, how it will make downtown more vibrant. Talk about these things and make sure that there's a level of understanding across all of those things. The other thing that we struggled with a little bit was we had really strong advocates. They were students, and people discounted them because they were students. They are temporary, they don't pay property taxes, they made all these kinds of arguments. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that you consider all of the opinions of the people who are stakeholders in your community. Students matter, young people matter, the elderly matter, and hear all those voices. And again, you get to that point by customizing the message. I like this diagram very much. If you can stimulate public interest, you can get the right community groups, and that will only happen if you customize your outreach message. And then it creates a positive cycle where more and more people become interested. So that's all for me. If you need more information about rapid transit in the region of Waterloo, there's a web link for it. And if you'd like to talk to me some more about rapid transit, I'd be happy to do so. There's my contact. Thanks very much.